The 2nd of February, 1943. Stalingrad, the Soviet Union. The German Sixth Army, after 5 months of fierce fighting and heavy casualties, having exhausted their ammunition and food, finally capitulates, making it the first of Hitler's field armies to surrender during World War II. The battle for the city proves a decisive psychological turning point, ending a string of German victories in the summer of 1942 and beginning the long retreat westward. The Red Army remains on the offensive, and in June 1944, during Operation Bagration, it launches a massive assault against the German troops, leading to significant Soviet advances in occupied territories. Several months later, when the Russians for the first time enter the territory of the Third Reich, they seek revenge for the horrors the Nazis inflicted in Russia. The Red Army soldiers engage in widespread looting, destruction of property, killing of civilians, and mass raping of German women. One of the worst atrocities committed by the Red Army on German territory is the Nemmersdorf Massacre. After Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on the 30th of January 1933, he immediately began preparing Germany for war. One of his first actions was to rebuild and expand the German military, which had been significantly restricted by the Treaty of Versailles. By 1935, he openly defied the treaty by reintroducing conscription and increasing the size of the army. Additionally, Hitler established the Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, and expanded the navy, significantly boosting Germany's military capabilities. Hitler also focused on strategic foreign alliances to strengthen Germany's position. He forged the Rome-Berlin Axis with Italy in 1936, aligning with Mussolini's fascist regime. This was followed by the Anti-Comintern pact with Japan in the same year, aimed at countering the influence of the Soviet Union. These alliances not only provided Germany with strategic partners, but also signaled its aggressive military intentions to the world. In 1936, Hitler further demonstrated his aggressive foreign policy by remilitarizing the Rhineland, a direct violation of the Treaty of Versailles. This bold move went unchallenged by the other European powers, emboldening Hitler's expansionist agenda. His annexation of Austria in the Anschluss of 1938 and the occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1939 revealed his relentless drive to expand German territory. The Second World War started on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. The early stages of the war saw rapid German advances in Europe, with the fall of Poland, the invasion of France, and the evacuation of British forces from Dunkirk in 1940. Following the successful campaign in France, Hitler set his sights on the Soviet Union. On Sunday, the 22nd of June 1941, under the codename Operation Barbaration, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, its ally in the war against Poland. 3 million German soldiers were supported by Finnish, Romanian, Hungarian, Italian, Slovak, and Croatian troops. Within weeks, German divisions conquered the Baltic republics of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. For Nazi Germany, this attack was not an ordinary military operation. The war against the Soviet Union was a war of annihilation, between German fascism and Soviet communism, a racial war between German Aryans and subhuman Slavs and Jews. Following the invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazi regime unleashed a campaign of unprecedented brutality. As the German military advanced, Nazi forces including the SS and Einsatzgruppen, which were Nazi mobile death squads, systematically targeted civilians, particularly Jews, communists, and other groups deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. Entire villages were wiped out in mass executions, and millions of Soviet prisoners of war were subjected to starvation, forced labor, and summary execution. The siege of Leningrad and the atrocities in cities like Kiev and Minsk illustrated the Nazis' ruthless disregard for human life. In addition to mass shootings, the Nazis employed methods such as mass starvation, forced deportations, and the destruction of homes and infrastructure to break the spirit of the Soviet people. The Nazi occupation policies aimed to decimate the population and pave the way for German colonization as envisioned in Hitler's quest for Lebensraum, meaning living space. The tide of the Second World War began to shift dramatically with the defeat of the Nazis at Stalingrad in February 1943. This significant setback marked the first major defeat for Hitler's forces and set the stage for a relentless Soviet counteroffensive. Over the next year, Soviet troops pushed the Germans westward, reclaiming lost territories and advancing with increasing momentum. By mid-1944, the Red Army had driven the Nazis out of Soviet territory, and in October 1944, Soviet forces reached the border of East Prussia. On the 21st of October 1944, T-34 tanks of the 25th Tank Brigade advanced into East Prussian territory, reaching the village of Nemmersdorf, today's Russian Mayakovskoye, located 120 kilometers east of Kaliningrad. This village held strategic importance due to its location, as it had the only bridge running east to west within a span of approximately 25 kilometers. When the Soviet tanks crossed the bridge to establish a foothold on the other side of the river, intense fighting followed. Despite several attempts, German forces were unable to retake the bridge, as Soviet tanks and infantry successfully repelled the counterattacks. During an air raid, several Soviet soldiers sought refuge in a makeshift bunker, where they encountered 14 local civilians who had already taken shelter. According to the testimony of one of the survivors, when a Soviet officer arrived, he ordered everyone out, and the civilians were then shot at close range. That night, Soviet forces withdrew across the river to defensive positions. When the German army subsequently retook control of Nemmersdorf, they discovered the full scale of the atrocities the Red Army had committed against German civilians. Beyond the 14 civilians initially encountered, the Germans found that the massacre involved numerous other victims throughout the village, revealing the brutal extent of the violence. Nazi German authorities set up an international commission, which included neutral countries like Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland to investigate the case. Reports and photographs later emerged claiming that up to 13 women were found dead with their skirts lifted and underwear pulled down, suggesting that they had been raped. The raped girls and women were aged between 8 and 84. After the war, Major General Erich Detlefsen, former Chief of Staff of the German Fourth Army, stated that when the Soviets entered the village, they tortured civilians by nailing them to barn doors and then shooting them. Many women were raped before being shot, and around 50 French and Belgian prisoners of war were also executed. Another post-war witness recounted seeing a cart in a farmyard with naked women nailed to it by their hands in a cruciform position. Nearby in a barn, 2 naked women were found nailed to the doors in a similar crucified position. Inside various dwellings, a total of 72 bodies were discovered, including women, children, and a 74-year-old man. Some infants had their heads bashed in. Immediately after the massacre, Nazi propaganda portrayed the perpetrators as Soviet beasts and arsonist murderers, using the event to depict the advancing Red Army as brutally inhumane. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wanted to spread a message through state-controlled newspapers that a systematic, cruel slaughter of every individual would take place, and Germany would be turned into one vast cemetery. His goal was to instill fear, galvanize the German population, and strengthen their resolve to resist the Soviet advance at all costs. The strategy worked, and civilians reacted immediately, with an increase in the number of volunteers joining the Volkssturm, or the People's Storm, which was the new defensive militia into which males aged between 16 and 60 were inducted from the 18th of October, 1944. The militia joined the regular military in the last defensive battles against the Allied troops and comprised one of the final components of the total war, promulgated by Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels as part of a Nazi endeavor to overcome their enemy's military strength through sheer force of will. Poorly equipped and inadequately trained, thousands of males fought and died for the German war effort, even as defeat had become inevitable. The massacre of Nemmersdorf also triggered a mass exodus of civilians fleeing the advancing Red Army. Those who escaped often encountered harsh conditions, while those left behind faced brutal violence, including executions, forced labor, and widespread sexual assaults. By 1950, approximately 12 to 14.6 million Germans had either fled or been expelled from Central and Eastern Europe into Allied-occupied Germany and Austria. Estimates suggest that up to 2 million German women were victims of sexual violence as Soviet forces swept through Eastern Europe and into Germany. In cities like Berlin, where sexual violence was rampant in the final weeks of the war, many women felt they had no escape from their suffering and committed suicide. With the collapse of communism, new information came to light about the Nemmersdorf Massacre, confirming that Soviet soldiers did commit serious war crimes. However, Nazi propaganda and some witness accounts had greatly exaggerated the events. While the full extent of the massacre is still unclear, it is now believed that 26 German civilians, rather than 72, were executed, and at least 2, possibly 3 young women were raped. The Nemmersdorf Massacre is a stark illustration of the catastrophic consequences of Hitler's misguided ambitions. His promise of Lebensraum led not to prosperity, but to widespread suffering and devastation. As the Red Army advanced, the brutality inflicted on German civilians mirrored the horrors that Nazi Germany had unleashed across Europe. Millions of Jews were systematically murdered in concentration camps, and millions of Soviet prisoners of war died from starvation, forced labor, and execution. In the end, Hitler's vision of conquest brought only ruin, leaving millions of Germans to face the consequences of his decision for decades to come.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.